So one thing I forgot to say last week, and I should have, and it just totally slipped my mind, was last week was the 2-year anniversary for us teaching this series.
Praise the Lord.
The 2-year anniversary. So that's how long we've been in it and at it and around it and about it. And we're about halfway through chapter 9. And so I know, or I think, what I want to say tonight is probably going to spill into next week. So this is going to be part 1 of 2 parts. But from what I can tell, I think tonight, it really won't be a part 1 and part 2. It'll be a continuation of wherever I end up tonight. But I do think that tonight we will get through the actual verses that I want to look at. But those verses are going to raise all kinds of related questions, especially in the area of demonology. And this is not a demonology, Satanology class or study, but it's going to inevitably lead us down that path. So maybe I should say this: if you have any questions tonight, maybe hold them till the end of next week, because maybe they'll be answered then. And I'll probably say next week that there's a whole lot of things that we just didn't say and didn't cover. But the things that we are going to say and that we are going to cover are probably just going to raise all kinds of interesting questions in everyone's mind, because they do in my mind. And you just think, well, how much more can we say? Where do we need to draw a line and say, this is a study of Revelation. This isn't a study of all the Bible has to say about demons. But demons are brought up in this chapter. Remember, a few weeks ago, I said for the first time we've been introduced to Satan in this chapter under a symbol. It's not been a direct, I'm talking about Satan type of verse, but he's the star that's fallen, because it immediately assigns personal pronouns. So we know this is talking in verses 1 and 2 about a personality, a male personality. It can't be a human, not with the description here. It can't be a good spirit, not with the description here. It's got to be something evil, but it can't be something low and weak in the power of darkness. It's got to be something high enough that he would be handed the key to the bottomless pit, and he would be the one releasing all of these locusts that we've been talking about. So I find chapter 9, as you can tell from this introductory paragraph of mine, to be interesting with regard to Satan and to demons, or Satan and evil spirits, or Satan and fallen angels. There's a lot of terminology, but we're talking about all of the same kinds of things. These are spirit beings, created, not human, and fallen, so not elect. That would be Satan and everything under him. So Satan is introduced early on under a symbol. He's going to be called the devil and Satan in chapter 12. But this is so characteristic of apocalyptic literature, or of John in general, to ease his way into this whole area. So we've been introduced to Satan under a symbol, and that is a fallen star who has been handed this key to the bottomless pit. And then we've been introduced to something else called these locusts. And then after next week, the following week, we will be to the 6th angel sounding his trumpet. And we have some more creatures which are released from somewhere around the river Euphrates. So this is just, this is biblical, but it sounds like science fiction because of what the nature of the material is. So earlier, which means last week, maybe week before also, we learned of the origin and the mission of these locusts. We don't know a lot about them yet, and so I'm going to put them in quotation marks. But we do know a fairly good amount. We know what John has been able to clue us in on as far as their origin and as far as their mission. And as far as their appearance, we know something about their appearance. He said he saw locusts. So reference your earlier picture that we saw. He saw something that, first of all, when he saw what he saw, he didn't go, oh, that's a giraffe, or oh, that's a lion, or oh, that's a hippopotamus. He said, oh, that's a locust. So he saw something like this. Now, that's not exactly what he saw, because he's going to go on and tell us, now here, the thing that I saw that I called a locust, here's what it looked like. That's where we're going to be tonight in verses 7 through 10. And so we know something about what they look like, about their origin. And of course, what this is really about is what is their purpose, because that's why they are under the fifth trumpet. Their purpose is to torment or to torture the unsaved population, maybe some of it, maybe all of it. It doesn't say, for a limited period of time, for a period of 5 months. But we're not finally given a description of these locusts until we get down to verse 7. So until now, all we can envision, back to your two pictures from last time, all we can envision is a locust, take the locust, and then take the tail off the scorpion and put on the back of the locust. And that's all we can envision, because he said, I saw a locust, and then he said they had stingers on their tail like a scorpion. So those are the two things that stood out to John. Locust-like in appearance, with one big exception, and that is this scorpion-like tail on the back. So if that is all we are dealing with, we haven't gotten to verses 7 and following yet. If that's all we were dealing with, that's a pesky little insect for sure, but nothing that a size 11 shoe couldn't make a mess of in a hurry, or a giant fly swatter. Either way, if that's all we're dealing with, because that's all we know so far. That's all we know. Again, we like to read it in its context without and try to pretend like we don't know what we do know, and that's verses 7 through 10. Pretending like we don't know that, because I just think it gives us a better way of grasping what John is experiencing and how we are supposed to process it. It's just a little bug that's easy to squash with your boot or with a giant fly swatter. But tonight, as we get into the next section, which we haven't taught on yet, it's like a color in, it's like numbered coloring. Now he's going to color in the missing pieces of the picture that we did not have in the first 6 verses. And when he does that, then what we realize is that we have something much more substantial and much more problematic. You follow me so far? If all we thought of was a little grasshopper with a scorpion tail, that's trouble, but nothing that you can squash. As he goes on to give us the full description, we realize I might have misunderstood something early on. And so we're going to really be looking at, our text tonight will be verses 7 through 10. And 10 we've kind of talked about already, because I said earlier that there are 3 references to scorpions, and this is the final one, and this is the more complete one, where before he just said they have power like a scorpion. And we have to then assume he's talking about the stinger and the venom that comes from that. Now we don't have to assume that anymore, because verse 10 tells us, and they had on their tails like unto scorpions stingers, and their power was to hurt men for 5 months. So you guys know a little bit about apocalyptic literature. Revelation is the Bible's most developed apocalyptic work. Other works would be things like Daniel in the Old Testament, Zechariah in the Old Testament, and some smaller portions of Isaiah's little apocalypse, Isaiah 24, 25, 26, 27, some of Ezekiel 38 and 39. But as far as books go, probably Daniel and Zechariah would be the 2 big books that have tons of apocalyptic material in them. And then, of course, the cream of the crop is in the New Testament, and that's the Bible's last book, and that's the book of Revelation. So you know some about apocalyptic literature, and one of the things that you know is apocalyptic literature, because of its nature and the subject matter involved, uses all sorts of literary devices and uses all types of figures of speech. What is a figure of speech? We all know what it is, but here's a definition. I just looked it up to see what is a definition of a figure of speech. It is a word or a phrase used in a non-literal sense for rhetorical or vivid effect. That's just out of a dictionary. So for rhetorical purposes, or for a clear or more vivid image and picture, then you have a figure of speech. And one of the most important, most often used in all of the Bible, and definitely in Revelation, and nowhere in Revelation more than what we're going to see in verses 7, 8, and 9 and 10, is this particular figure of speech that I always just called a smile with an eye, or an eye smile. It's a simile. That is a very well-known figure of speech, and it's going to be used a lot here. It's been used earlier, back in chapter 4. Anytime John is trying to describe something, like when he sees the throne of God, then he says in chapter 4 and verse 3, "He that sat upon the throne was to look upon like a jasper and a sardine stone, and there was a rainbow round about the throne in sight like unto an emerald." Those are similes there. It's a figure of speech. It's a particular figure of speech called a simile, which is used to make an analogy or to make a comparison. So we see something, or we want to talk about something, write about something, describe something to a person, and we say this is analogous to that. And the reason that the writer does it doesn't have anything to do with his intellectual or verbal deficiency. It's not because he's dumb. If we think, well, why would someone use a simile? It has nothing to do with the writer's intellectual or verbal deficiency. It has everything to do with the subject matter. It's not because John's not a smart person. It's not because Daniel wasn't smart. It's not because Zechariah wasn't smart. It was because of the subject matter that they were dealing with. And I know we covered some of this a long time ago, way back in the beginning of this study of Revelation, when I talked a lot about apocalyptic literature, because people just poo-poo the idea that you can read Revelation and take it literally, and they say the reason that you can't is because of all of these figures of speech and everything going on. And my point back then is, what other way can you talk about these types of issues and objects and experiences except with figures of speech? Because we can't talk about them, this is the way I would describe it, as they really are. Can't do it because we don't have the words to do it. We don't have the words to do it because we're seeing something, experiencing something, being told something. Something is being revealed to us that is just in another dimension or in another realm. And so we cannot talk about things as they really are. What we have to do is we have to use a simile, and you know a simile is normally quickly spotted by the word, seeing the word as or seeing the word like. Such and such is as, or as it were, or as it was. And the other word is like, that this was like that, or such and such was like unto such and such. There's a great example of this. If you go back to the book of Isaiah, a very famous verse. I thought of this and I thought, this will be just the verse to use, where God, through the prophet Isaiah in chapter 1 and verse 18, makes this incredible pronouncement and promise to Israel. And he says, "Come now and let us reason together, saith the Lord, though your sins be as scarlet, they will be as white as snow. Yes, though they be like crimson, they will be as wool." You see how many times you see as and like? Yeah. Right there. He is making a comparison, an analogy through a figure of speech, through a particular figure of speech called a simile. Smile with an eye or eye smile, called a simile. Well, look, sin is a moral and spiritual evil and failure. It's colorless. Sin has no color. It's a moral failure. It's a spiritual failure. But every pious Israelite, when they heard Isaiah say this, or they read Isaiah's scroll and they come to this 18th verse, they would know immediately what's being said, because they knew that red, probably in this context, red has to do with blood. And under the Mosaic covenant, anything that had to do with blood, whether it's a cut on your finger, whether you've killed an animal and shed blood, you've got to bury that blood. Anything that had to do with blood made a person unclean for 7 days. And that was a big deal, to be unclean, to not be around other people, to not be able to sacrifice. It was a big deal. And so God is saying, though you have all of this uncleanness, this red, said, I will make your sins as white as wool and as white as snow. And so we have a beautiful example of a simile. And so that's what we're going to see in these verses. So if you'll turn back to Revelation chapter 9, I'm just trying to make sure I can help all of us get in our mind, in our Bible study tonight, what John is experiencing. John had never seen anything like this before. He had never seen anything like this. So he has to come up with a way other than what he could have done, come to think of it, because we have done this before. He could have said, what I saw. He's going to describe, he's going to tell us what it was. He said, what I saw. So far he said it's locusts and they have the stinger of a scorpion on the back upside of them. What I saw looked like a whatchamacallit. And we would go, thanks a lot, John. Or it looked like a thingamajiggy. That's what we say when we don't have the words to describe what it is. But John's way better than that. Thankfully, John chose some words and he chose analogies so that the readers could understand. And so with that being said, let's just read these few verses and we will start working our way through them. We got through with verse 6 last time, where in my opinion I said I think this is John as a first century church Christian prophet, looking far into the future from his standpoint, looking to whenever these locusts will come on the scene. And he said, in those days, men will pursue, they will seek death and not find it. And they will desire to die and death will flee from them. Now, he's through with his introduction. Now he's going to actually tell us something about these locusts. That's what we've been after all these last few weeks. And here we go. And the shapes of the locusts were what? Like unto. I said, this is the book of figures of speech. This is the book of similes. And this is the passage in the book of similes that is all about similes. The shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold. That's two similes in one description there. and their faces were as the faces of men. And they had hair as the hair of women. If you see like unto, as it were, then we have a simile. And their teeth were as the teeth of lions. And they had breastplates, as it were, breastplates of iron. And the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions. And there were stingers in their tails, and their power was to hurt men for 5 months. So did you see, it just should jump out to you in verses 7, 8, and 9 in particular. Like, as, like, as, like. Simile after simile after simile. There's nowhere in Revelation where you're going to find so many of them piled up on top of each other. You're going to find plenty of places, and we've already covered plenty of places earlier, but you won't find as many as you find in Revelation 9, verses 7 through 9. So let's start looking at these and see what these can do to help us understand now the full picture. He didn't just see a little 2 or 3 or 4 inch bug. He saw something much more substantial and much more problematic. So the first thing he tells us in verse 7, he said, the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses. The very first thing we should take away from this description of the locust is their shape as well as their sheer size. It's not only their shape, it couldn't be the shape of a horse if it was 4 inches long. This is the shape and size of a horse. And when we go on to read some of the other things, and it talks about their hair and their face and their teeth, well, it would be like a dollhouse figure. If you have a locust, it would have teeth about like that big, and John would never be able to see that. This has to be a big creature. So it has a shape, not exactly like a locust. It has the shape more of a horse. So the first thing in our mind should be overall shape and size of a horse. That's how he starts the whole description. And what that reminds me of, believe it or not, it might not remind you of it, but it does me. If you'll go all the way back to Ezekiel chapter 1. And I remember when I was teaching you almost 2 years ago about the living creatures, we went back to Ezekiel 1 and spent a lot of time here because we were trying in Revelation 4 to understand what's a living creature. You've got these beings called a living creature, zoon, and they've got the face of a man and an eagle and a bear and an ox, and they have wings, and what does this thing look like? Well, Ezekiel gives us a much, much better description here in chapter 1 and in chapter 10 of his book. And so let me start in verse 4 of Ezekiel 1. There's only one point I'm trying to make here, and I hope this makes sense to you when I tie it into what we're saying about the first thing that we see about the locust is the overall shape and size. Just say horse, and then you'll be on the right page. Ezekiel 1:4. And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it, and out of the midst thereof, as the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire. So this is a whirlwind, a storm that's coming from the north, that has flashes of lightning, that has fire inside itself that seems to be enfolding itself. And then stepping out of that, out of the midst of what he's just described, then these creatures proceed. The likeness of 4 living creatures. And here's what I want you to get, the end of verse 5. And this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man. Just like John said, these locusts look like a horse. They don't look like a locust. They're not 4 inches long. They don't look like a scorpion. They look like a horse. What Ezekiel is saying is those living creatures, which could have been serpentine, they could have been reptilian, they could have been like a giant woolly mammoth, they could have been anything. He said, no, what I want you to walk away, first of all, is think of a man. Now, that we're going to have to doctor the man up some, but first of all, think of a biped. A man standing on 2 feet, not something walking on 4, but think of a man, a biped. And he said, if you think about that, that's where you start with your living creature. And then he goes on to say, well, it's really not a man because it's got some extraordinary features. Every one of them had 4 faces and every one of them had 4 wings. And their feet was straight feet, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot. So we talked about this. They don't have feet like you see I have. They have a foot like a calf. It goes straight down to the ground. And we talked about all that back then. So my point in going back here is, I think it's very similar that both Ezekiel and John are trying to first of all say, here's where I want you to start as far as imagery goes in your mind. Think of a horse. Just think of exactly what a horse looks like, and then we're going to start doctoring the horse. So you've got a big animal. He's got a lot of mane. He's got a big head. He's got a long, thick neck. He's got a nose. He's powerfully built. He's got a long tail behind him. That's a horse. And then we have to say, but he doesn't have a tail that looks like that. Not that type of tail. Doesn't have the tail of a horse. He has the tail of a scorpion. So we take that horse and then we start doctoring him. What's interesting is that there are similarities, and I didn't provide you with a picture of a horse, but we all know what a horse looks like. There actually are enough similarities, believe it or not, between a horse and a locust that, in case you didn't know, for your information, do you know what the German word for locust, what it means? It means hay horse. Hay horse. Because it looks like a horse, but they go out and eat grass, which is exactly what a locust does. Do you know what the Italian word for locust means? I mean, I don't know what it is, but the Italian word for locust, what it means, little horse. So there are 2 different European languages, both German and Italian, that recognize exactly what John is saying here without any influence of biblical revelation. They know a horse and a locust look similar. One's real small, one's real big, I got that, but they look similar. And if you think of a horse and then you have to doctor it up a little bit, you end up with a locust. And most of it has to do with that big old head that's sitting on the front of it, because horses don't have wings. But if you look at wherever our picture of look at the big, powerful back leg on the locust, which is exactly what horses are known for, powerful back legs. All right, let's continue. So the shape of the locust was likened to horses. And then this next phrase, prepared unto battle. So not these little spindly legs that you have on a locust. Muscular, prepared unto battle. It's going to be all decked out. This is no sway-backed, old worn-out mare. This is no farm horse. This is something powerful. This is something very powerful. Last week when we looked at the prophecy of Joel, Joel compares them. In Joel 2, I'm going to read verse 4. And the appearance, these were enemies encroaching upon Israel from the north, sent by God, called God's army. The appearance of them is as the appearance of horses, and so shall they run. Very interesting. Joel makes that same comparison in Joel 2:4. So before we go any further, that's where we start. That's the overall imagery that we have in our mind, is of a powerful horse prepared for battle. We're going to go through the rest of verse 7 as well as verse 8 and 9, but I don't know that we are always able to extract the precise meaning from every point of description. And maybe that's not even what God intended. I think some of them we probably can, and some of them I would probably be at a loss for coming up with, well, I'm positive this is the symbolism meant by this. And maybe that's not even what we should be trying to do. I did copy down one person's brilliant statement they make. Here is a very, very short sentence, and here's what they said. John's account is so straightforward and vivid that comment is superfluous. In other words, just read it, let it stand, don't make any comments at all. He said it's so straightforward and so vivid that any type of commentary on it is unnecessary. Now, some people, other Bible commentators, want to talk about centaurs as soon as they get to this. They want to either talk about centaurs or helicopters. Do you know what a centaur is? You probably do. You might not know. What is a centaur? Yeah, so they come from mythology, from Greek mythology, especially up in northern Greece, especially up in the area that was called Thessaly, which is where Paul visited and then wrote 1st and 2nd Thessalonians 2. Yes, it is a mythological creature that is, has the body of a horse, and then by the time you get to like the neck, then it becomes the torso and the arms and shoulders and head of a man. So it's just like a man cut off, his torso stuck on the neck of a horse or the body of a horse. And I don't know why Bible commentators want to talk about centaurs, because there's nothing here that's like that at all. It doesn't say that he had a man's arms or man's chest or man's torso. It doesn't say that at all. But for some reason, a lot of commentators, because they think that centaurs are so crazily mythological, and they think that Revelation is similar, that it's talking about things that really don't exist, then they go, well, maybe John got that from Greek mythology. I don't think so. I think John got this because he had a divine revelation. He had a real vision when he was in heaven, and he was able to see into the future, and he saw these creatures when they came out of the bottomless pit, and they emerged from the smoke that came out first, and he saw exactly what they look like. I don't think it has anything to do with centaurs, even though C.S. Lewis talked about them in Chronicles of Narnia, and if you're familiar with the Harry Potter franchise, there are a lot of centaurs in the Harry Potter franchise. But no, these are not centaurs. They're not scorpion centaurs. They don't have anything really to do with that, except the fact that they do have a scorpion's tail. So if you have your picture now, that I think you all do, of the artist's rendition, it's just an artist's rendition. But take a look at that, because this is where we're headed. I mean, this is better than a centaur from Thessaly in northern Greece for sure. This is more accurate to what is going to actually be described and what's going to unfold for us here. There are probably things that could or should be done differently, but I'm not an artist, so you guys just pull this from online, and I really appreciate it. So let's read some verses, and then we're going to come back and look at this picture. So the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold. So as I said a few moments ago, the very fact that it's going to describe what's on the head, what the teeth look like, what the face looks like, means it is not a figure from a dollhouse. It has to be something of substantial size. That's why I think it's referring to the horse, because that's what it looked like to John. And with what he sees on the head, he gives us two similes here. He said, on their heads were, as it were. He didn't see a crown. He would say, I saw a crown. But it was something that looked enough like a crown that's what he has to use. Remember what a simile is. It's an analogy. It's trying to tell us something with a word that we do know to explain something that we do not know. We don't know what it has on its head, but we just know somehow it's something like a crown. And then he says these crowns were like gold. Two similes in one description here, probably referring to the color. I doubt it referred to the metal or whatever it was made of, probably to the color. So they have some type of decorative, that's what a crown is, right? It's decorative. I would say some type of decorative gold-like battle headdress, and maybe it has some reference to warfare or to victory as a symbol. But we're not told. What does the crown, what does the thing that looks like a crown and is gold in color, what does that symbolize? We're simply not told. The end of verse 7 is also very interesting. And their faces were as the faces of men. Our picture happens to have a beard on it. I don't know whether it's a bearded man's face, but it does look like a man's face. So in other words, not just this dumb, wide-eyed, crazy look that a horse can have. You've seen a horse when they get spooked and those eyes are huge and they're like going way to the back of their head. This had a face like a man's face. And what's distinctive about a man's face are his eyes, because it's not going to have men's teeth. It's going to have another kind of teeth. It's the eyes. So it probably speaks of the intelligent, thoughtful appearance of these creatures. This isn't a dumb-looking, wild-eyed, wide-eyed horse, and it's not an old bug-eyed locust. This is a creature that has intelligence, has thoughts, has plans, has a will, has a mind, quote unquote, who can go and do what he's been released to do. In verse 8, and they had hair as the hair of women. Well, that's a pretty good picture we have before us. So they don't have those spinally narrow, thin antennae of a bug or of an insect, but it is thick and full and plush. And what does that mean? I don't know. It seems to me, when I look at this creature here, it would be fairly scary with all these long locks of hair if that thing was flying, and they do fly. If that thing was flying around me or flying toward me, to see, rather than just these little antennae, to see all of this hair blowing in the wind. The next thing we come to in the second half of verse 8, and this even gets more scary, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. We know what lions' teeth look like. I think what we have on our picture is a fairly good image of that. And what did I have? I have Joel. Again, we read Joel last time, but Joel 1 and verse 6, in his description of a real locust plague, he says in verse 6, and a nation has come upon my land, strong and without number, whose teeth are the teeth of a lion. Now, for Joel, in his prophecy, these were real locusts. So now this is completely spiritualized in his prophecy. They really didn't have teeth that look like locusts, but look like lions. What he meant is they are devouring everything that we need to eat. That's all the grass and all the leaves. Whereas with what John is seeing here, I believe this is much more real. They are teeth that reminded him of the teeth of a lion.
This is a great example in Joel. If you read the context, clearly the meaning has to be a symbolic meaning. If you read the whole context, because if they were real lions' teeth, well, lions don't
eat grass and bark trees. That's right.
Versus over here,
yeah, exactly. And look at verse 9. I mean, this is all I'm going to say as we work our way through these, because there's not much more I can say. But look at verse 9 in Revelation 9. We might ask the question, And this kind of prompts us to ask the question, when we see that they're wearing breastplates, will people fight back? Will they resist? I would assume so. I would assume if you're one of these heathen people and one of these creatures the size of a horse is headed towards you to attack, you're not just going to say, go ahead and attack me. I'm part of the curse and I'm going to be tormented, tortured for 5 months. You might fight back. They had breastplates, as it were, breastplates of iron. Horses don't have that. Locusts don't have that. These creatures have that. They have breastplates, as it were, breastplates of iron. And then finally, in the rest of this verse, which is a long portion of that verse, as these creatures fly to seek their victims, then they sound like horse-drawn chariots going to battle. The sound of their wings. So you've got to keep the wing of the locust on the horse. Horse doesn't have that. Scorpion doesn't have that. You've got to take the parts of these three creatures and meld them together. So they do have wings. This creature that we have a picture of, that you pulled off the internet, it has wings. And it says that the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. So that's the clickety-clack of the wooden or iron wheels of the chariot. That's the clickety-clack of the shoes of the horses. That is thousands and thousands of horse-drawn chariots being pulled into what? Battle. Being pulled into battle, running to battle is what it sounds like when these locusts fly. They're not hopping around and running around. According to this, they are flying because they have wings. So,
and imagine the size of the wings. If these things really are the size of a horse, imagine how big the wings would have to be to lift them up. And if they have breastplates of iron, that's a heavy creature.
Yes.
I'm thinking in my mind of some Jurassic Park creature that has huge wings who can fly through the air,
I'm sure someone could improve on our artist rendition. It doesn't exactly look like a horse the way they have it drawn. I think we need more muscular, probably legs and back legs, and a thicker, lengthy body, still with wings attached to the side of it. But if we put all of that together, then that's probably what we have as far as what this creature, now that we've gotten to verses 7, 8, 9, and 10, what these creatures actually look like. But I'm going to make a comment right now and not undo everything I just said, but I'm going to make a comment to temper everything that I just said. And that is and I don't ever see anybody saying this, so I think it is so important to say it. However, we are still talking about similes. We need an artist rendition. We have one. I asked for it. I'm not complaining that we have it. I'm not complaining about the one that we have. But we must be careful not to do what the artist did. And the artist, I guess, you can't do anything but that. And that is lift off each of these items. They took the teeth out of a lion and stuck it in here. But did John say it had lion's teeth? No. Absolutely not. No, he didn't. So everything I just said has to be tempered with, we've got to remember that these are all similes. It never said that it had a man's face. It never said it had women's hair. It never said it had lion's teeth. Never said any of that. It said it had things that were like that. So what we end up with when we draw it, when they drew that, what we end up with is a cartoon. I mean, that's a cartoon figure to have little lion's teeth stuck in that one's mouth. What we end up with is a cartoon. In reality, it is much more integrated and it is much, much scarier. The thing we're looking at kind of looks like a cartoon, but it's the best you can do. If it's like a lion's teeth, then you have to draw lion's teeth, but they're not lion's teeth. They're just something that is like lion's teeth. So I don't know any other way to do it except have an artist draw it for us, which they did, and then we can go back and critique it. But I think having that and realizing the sheer size of it now, as big as a horse prepared for battle. Twice we've said that these things are prepared for battle. In verse 7, prepared for battle. And in the end of verse 9, like many horses, and we're back to horses, like many horses running to battle. So that's maybe why they do have breastplates on them, because humans will certainly try to fight back and attack and avoid them. That's really what I wanted to say, and that's about as far as I thought I would get. And we're going to go in another direction with the few moments we have left tonight, and then we'll finish this up, Lord willing, next time. That's what I wanted to say about verses 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. And I hope that was helpful. So our question that I want to raise tonight, and we'll barely get on this topic. We'll barely cover anything here, but the question I want to raise is, what are these locusts? Or who are they? What are they? Who are they? What are they? We know their origin. We know their mission. Now we know pretty much what they look like. You take that artist rendition and doctor it up yourself. If you're a good artist, I'm sure you can do better than that. I'm not. I couldn't. Doctor that up yourself. We know what they look like. We do know what they look like. Thanks to John, we do know what they look like. What are they? And who are they? But is this all symbolic or is this literal and real? So I brought a commentary that will give us other commentators' views. It's very interesting to see what people say. Who are they? What are they? Are we to take this symbolically and that's it? And of course there are symbols in Revelation. That's what similes are all about. Of course there are symbols here. But do symbols have a literal meaning, or do they only have a symbolic meaning? You'll see what I'm talking about when you listen to what some commentators have said about these locusts. So here's one who says, this is a description of the operation of the powers of darkness in the soul of the wicked during the present age. That is so mystical. So these things don't really exist. It's just the powers of darkness working in the soul of an unbeliever. That's what the locusts are, according to him. Someone else said that the locusts are chronic hardship, diseases, enmities, and insecurities. Someone else said they are the forces of decay and corruption that God will use to undermine the Roman Empire. So this is someone that believes Revelation was fulfilled back in the first century. And then here's my favorite one. Because, this guy he went all out. He went all out. He said, these locusts will appear in new disguises and torment in forms such as alcohol and drug abuse, insatiable yearning for sexual promiscuity, sexually transmitted diseases, collective hysteria and subgroup tantrums, neurotic drives in diverse forms, driving passions for power and prestige and wealth at the expense of one's own humanity. This is what the locusts are. They're not locusts, they're these things. They're torments of psychic disorders, debilitating inability to maintain personal relationships, and so forth. So that is definitely several examples of how people would interpret all of this symbolically. That the locusts are not real, they don't really have tails, they don't have stingers, they're not going to actually sting people, it's not going to last for 5 months. In other words, you have to deny every one of those things that we have studied the last few weeks that the text actually says. You have to deny all of that and say, really, it's just STDs is all this is talking about. I think there would be a better way to describe that. Actually, I think by the time we get to the end of this chapter, it talks about fornication. So if it wants to talk about fornication, it can talk about fornication. And that's exactly what the last couple of verses will do. So I don't have a lot of time left, but I want to get started. I believe that this is not merely symbolic. I believe there are symbols, and the symbols have to be interpreted in light of the text, the context, and any other information we have in Scripture, and that the reality is always greater than the symbol, and that the reason the symbol is used is because it's found in apocalyptic literature. I don't think it's merely symbolic. I think that these creatures are literal and that they are real, and I think that they are, and this is going to open up a whole new world of study. I think that they are evil spirits, for lack of a better name, because the Bible uses different names for these fallen creatures, but we'll just use that as kind of the broad name for these evil fallen creatures. I think evil spirits have been active on the earth for a long, long time. I think the Old Testament shows us that. I think the New Testament comes forth and makes everything so much clearer than what we would have known in the Old Testament. I think that David had an evil spirit that bothered him to the point that he tried to kill David, who would later become king. Saul, who would later become king. I think these evil spirits have been on the earth for a long, long time. And they are here to harass and harm and affect and possess people. They wreck people's minds. They ruin people's health. They can cause serious physical and health problems. And I think these creatures that have come out of the pit are just one category of them. So with the time we have left, look at a few verses over in the gospel accounts. First of all, in Matthew chapter 12. It's going to take a little time next week to develop all I want to say. So just kind of stay with me for now until we finish next week. I think evil spirits have always been active on the earth. I don't think these in the pit have always been active. I think that's the whole point that we're being told. That at that moment in time, new fallen evil spirits have been released on humanity. But some fallen evil spirits, often referred to as demons in the New Testament, have always been around. Less in the Old Testament, less as far as we see them less. I don't mean they were not present. We just know less about them, much more in the New Testament, that they're harassing and harming and affecting and possessing people. And they can ruin people's physical health. Matthew 12 and verse 22. Then was brought unto Jesus one possessed with a, King James says devil, but with a demon. They're actually different words for devil and demon. The King James translators weren't real up on demonology, but that's okay. We know there's only one devil, but we know there are many demons. This particular person was possessed with a demon, and this demon caused blindness and dumbness. The end of this verse. And he healed him insomuch that the blind and dumb both spake and saw. This physical problem, or these physical problems this individual had, were not hereditary. They were not caused by something else apart from a demon. This was caused by a demon. And notice it doesn't say, at least it doesn't say right here, it just says that he got healed. but how did he get healed? Well, if you go on and read like down in verse 24, you'll see, well, what actually happened was that demon was cast out, because they're accusing Jesus, oh, you've got the power of the devil, and that's how you're able to cast out a demon. It doesn't say that he cast him out, but that's the clear implication if you read the next few verses. And we see so many accounts where it is very clear that that is exactly what is taking place. Then over in Mark's Gospel, in chapter 9, we have a relatively long section here. This is very disturbing. Mark 9, beginning with verse 17. This is opening up our discussion for tonight and for next week on the subject of the presence, reality, and activity of evil spirits. Mark 9:17, one of the multitude answered and said, Master, I have brought unto thee my son, which hath a dumb spirit. And Jesus didn't say, well, look, you just are totally deceived. Demons don't cause things like that. There's just some malady that your relative has. Jesus acknowledges the truth of the fact of what this person was saying. And he said, wherever he takes him, he tears him. He foams and gnashes with his teeth and pineth away. And I spake to thy disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not. He answered him and saith, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him unto me. And they brought him unto him, and when he saw him, straightway the spirit tare him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed foaming. There's so much being told us here that please understand we just cannot digress and look at this. But after next week, you can go back and meditate on all of this and look at these passages of Scripture yourself and just think. So as this person is being brought to Jesus, the person falls down and convulses, and then Jesus asks the lad's father, how long ago is it since this came unto him? And the father said, this is not something recent. My child has had this demon for a long time. Oft times it cast him into the fire and into the water. So you can picture the story the father is telling. We would be out walking, and as we go by water, the spirit would cause my son to fall into the water or to fall into the fire. Why? To try to destroy that child. This father is beside himself, needing help. And he said, I tried to get help through your disciples, and they couldn't cast him out. He said, but if thou canst do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus said, if you can believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. And straightway the father of the child cried and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief. And when Jesus saw the people running together, he rebuked the foul spirit, saying unto him, Thou dumb and deaf spirit, I charge thee, come out of him, and enter no more into him. The spirit cried and rent him sore, and came out of him, and he was as one dead. Insomuch they said, He's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And there are just so many examples in the gospel accounts of the power of demonic spirits to just simply ruin people's health. And we're going to look at one final example, because this is going to open more doors, and that's back in chapter 5. More doors in our mind where you'll have a flood of questions. And this is in Mark 5, verses 1 through 20. I said not only do they ruin people's health, but they wreck people's minds. They cause serious physical and mental problems. So in Mark 5, it's often referred to as a Gadarene demoniac. It's also called, Matthew gives his account of the story. He uses some different names for the geography. So just in passing, I'll say there are many textual variants. Whether was it the Gadarene demoniac or the Gerasene demoniac or the Gergesene demoniac? Matthew uses some different names for the location, but probably Gadara was the city. You know, you could use different words and refer to the same area. Just one of them's a city, one of them is the region, one of them is the territory that it's in. When you put all the passages together, we know that we're on the east side. We know we're over in Decapolis. We know we're on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. We know we're in Gentile territory. We're not in Jewish territory anymore. We know that from this narrative in Matthew's. We also know that they're near the Sea of Galilee. And we also know that it's not a flat plain. There's some kind of cliff or slope, because we're told that that's how these pigs end up in the water. So you put all that together and don't worry about all of the textual variants that do appear in some of the manuscripts of Mark, because the scribes were trying to get him to agree and not contradict what Matthew said. There's probably a better way to solve all of that. So that being said, they came to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, into the country of the Gadarenes. And this story is often referred to as the Gadarene demoniac. And when he was come out of the ship, because they had sailed from the west shore to the east shore, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man. And what did he have? He had an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces, neither could any man tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. Verses 3 to 5 really should be in parentheses, because that's Mark's commentary. That's just an editorial explanation to his readers. This is not really part of the story. This is Mark explaining the background to the story. So the story goes from verse 2 down to verse 5. And you can tell that by reading. Verse 2, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. Verse 6, but when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshiped him. I want you to notice the variety of pronouns that are used. And ask yourself, who is speaking? Who's acting? Who's performing? Who is it I'm listening to here? Is it the man or is it the spirit? And it becomes very confusing as you work your way through these verses. And what you realize is that there is a man who has his own personality, who is almost completely under the control of the evil spirit that lives within him. And you'll see this in other cases of demon possession in the Gospels, where you'll find a person come up and it says they bowed down and worshiped. Well, that's definitely not the demon. That is the man who has fallen before Jesus seeking help. But then the demon is the one who's immediately taking control. So I'm going to read verse 6 again. When he saw Jesus afar off, this is the man, he ran and worshiped him. And worship is too strong of a word. It doesn't mean that he was worshiping Jesus as God. It just means that he did obeisance and he bowed down to him. And cried with a loud voice and said, now we're talking about another personality, what have I to do with thee, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God that thou torment me not. For he said unto him, come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And he asked him, what is thy name? And he answered, saying, my name is Legion, for we are many. Notice the quick shift from a singular to a plural pronoun. And he besought him much that he would not send who? Them away and out of the country. And your mind should just be rattling like, oh, there's so many questions. There's so many issues to deal with here in this passage. What does it mean, don't send us out of the country? We can't
go down all of those trails. Well, there was nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding, and all the demons, now we're back to a plurality, besought him, saying, Send us away into the swine, that we may enter into them. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave, and the unclean spirits, now it's all turned plural, went out and entered into the swine. The herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea, and there were about 2,000. That's Mark's editorial comment. And they were choked in the sea. Now, were the demons choked in the sea, or were the swine? There are so many questions left unanswered in this narrative. Some of them you can just figure out by common sense, and some of them you can't. And they that fed the swine fled and told in the city and in the country, and they went out to see what was done. And they come to Jesus and to him that was possessed with the demon, singular, and had the legion, plural, sitting clothed in his right mind, and they were afraid. I mean, everyone in this whole region knew exactly who this man was, untamed and wild. And they that saw it told them how it befell him that was possessed with the demon, and also concerning the swine. And they began to pray him to depart out of their coast. And when he was come into the ship, or the boat, they're headed back to the other side, he that had been possessed with the demon prayed him that he might be with him. Howbeit Jesus suffered him not, but saith unto him, Go home to thy friends, and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and hath had compassion on thee. And he departed and began to publish in Decapolis how great things Jesus had done for him, and all men did marvel. So I've gone long tonight. Let me just end with this. There are so many other cases and stories of demon-possessed people in the Gospels. You read all of these and you try to sift through the material, and you come to realize that evil spirits cause physical maladies, deafness, dumbness, blindness, all kinds of things. They cause terrible social, mental health problems. This man was all alone, roaming in an unclean cemetery, superhuman strength, like the demon had over there in Acts 19, where those men were trying to cast him out, and he jumped on 7 men and beat them all up and stripped their clothes off them. Superhuman strength caused by demonic, in this case, possession. So I think all along, the Old Testament, the New Testament, today, there's nothing in the end of the New Testament that said, well, after the New Testament is written and the canon is closed, demons will no longer be around. Nothing changes as far as demons are concerned. They've been allowed to roam about for thousands of years. Some of them, not all of them, not the locusts. The locusts have been in the pit. See, as we build on this, I think it's your understanding of demons and that realm and world is going to grow. You're going to understand, yeah, some of these were not released, and we'll discuss that later and why. And we're seeing when they're going to be released, when that fifth trumpet is blown. But they've been allowed to roam about for a long time, terrorizing unbelievers. They go in cemeteries, they go in houses and haunt them. They frequent dark places. When we read some things in Isaiah and in Ezekiel, when we read things later in Revelation in chapter 18, it talks about Babylon has fallen, and has become the haunt of every foul spirit. They will go to certain places. They will attach themselves to certain locations according to the Bible, not according to some wild, fanciful, exorcist type of philosophy or theology, but according to the Scriptures they will. And they will definitely go around terrorizing, if not possessing, unbelievers and causing them all kinds of problems. So we're going to stop with that, and we'll pick up there next week.
And with many crowds, the Lamb upon his throne, a heavenly anthem drowns all but its own. Awake my soul and sing of him who died for thee, and hail him as thy matchless King through all eternity. Crown him the Son of God before the worlds began, and ye who tread where he hath trod, crown him the Son of Man, who every grief hath known that wrings the human breast, and takes and bears them for his own, that all in him may rest. Crown him the Lord of life, who triumphed o'er the grave, and rose victorious in the strife for those he came to save. His glories now we sing, who died and rose on high, who died eternal life to bring, and lives that death may die. Crown him the Lord of love, behold his hands and side, those wounds yet visible above, in beauty glorified. All hail, Redeemer, hail, for thou hast died for me. Thy praise and glory shall not fail throughout eternity. Crown him with many crowns, the Lamb upon his throne. Hark how the heavenly anthem drowns, O music but its own. Awake my soul and sing of him who died for thee, and hail him as thy matchless King throughout eternity. Crown him the Son of God before the worlds began, and ye who tread where he hath trod, crown him the Son of Man, who every grief hath known that wrings the human breast, and takes and bears them for him.